The first thing to go wasn't the light, it was the sound. For 3 years, the rhythm of the neonatal intensive care unit at Metropolitan General had been the soundtrack to Maya Torres's life. A delicate, electronic symphony of beeping heart monitors, the gentle, metronomic puff of ventilators, the low hum of the isolettes that served as tiny, transparent wombs. It was a soundscape of fragile life, and Maya was one of its most devoted conductors. At 11:50, 2 p.m., the symphony stopped. The sudden, absolute silence was more shocking than any explosion. It was a physical presence, a crushing void where the pulse of the unit should have been. For a full, heart-stopping second, the 26-year-old nurse was frozen. Then, the world vanished into a profound, bottomless black. A collective, sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the darkness. The emergency lights flickered on a moment later, casting the room in a sickly, crimson glow that turned worried faces into demonic masks and life-saving equipment into skeletal silhouettes. The silence was immediately shattered by a cacophony of high-pitched, frantic alarms from the battery-powered monitors, a shrill chorus of technological screaming. Chaos erupted. A newer nurse began to cry. Another fumbled for a phone, her hands shaking. But Maya moved. Her station was Pod C, the corner reserved for the most critical infants. Her patient, whom she privately called Luna, was a wisp of a thing, born at 26 weeks and still shy of the 2-pound mark. Her lungs were wet, stubborn tissue that refused to work on their own. She lived and breathed only by the grace of the wall-mounted ventilator that now stood inert and useless. Maya didn't need to think. Her hands, guided by muscle memory honed over thousands of hours, went to the disaster prep kit on the wall. She snapped a green psyllium stick, and a ghostly chemical light bathed her workspace. She unhooked a clear plastic ambu bag from its peg. With a practiced twist, she disconnected the dead ventilator tube from the tiny endotracheal tube taped to Luna's impossibly small face and connected the ambu bag. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. Her own breath hitched, syncing with the rhythm she was now manually forcing into Luna's lungs. The baby was so small, the margin for error was non-existent. Too hard, and her lungs would burst. Too soft, and she would starve for air. Squeeze, release. The fate of this child had collapsed from a room full of million-dollar technology into the palm of her right hand. Brenda Vance, the charge nurse, materialized out of the red gloom, her voice a sharp, cutting edge of authority barely concealing a tremor of panic. Shelter in place? Everyone to their primary assignments! The main generator will kick on in 90 seconds, tops! Brenda was a relic from a nursing era Maya barely recognized, a woman who found safety in the rigid spine of a binder full of protocols. She trusted the system because for 30 years, it had never truly failed her. 90 seconds crawled by, each one a lifetime. 2 minutes. The main generator remained silent. A frantic, staticky call over a battery-powered walkie-talkie delivered the first piece of catastrophic news. A substation explosion a few blocks away. A massive surge had fried the hospital's primary transfer switch. The entire 15-story building was on the dregs of emergency power. Dr. Alan Evans, the attending neonatologist on call, arrived on the floor looking more irritated than concerned, a phone pressed to his ear. He was a man whose arrogance was as starched and crisp as his white coat. He absorbed the sine a dozen nurses, manually bagging a dozen infants, in a blood-red twilight and exuded an infuriating calm. "All right, people," he announced, pocketing his phone. "It's a city-wide blackout. The backup generator will power critical systems. We just need to bridge the gap." He looked at Maya, his eyes flicking down to her hand on the ambu bag. "Pacing, nurse. Don't get tired." Just then, a deep, promising rumble echoed up from the sub-basement. The main lights flickered, buzzed, and then flooded the NICU with brilliant, clean, beautiful light. The ventilators whirred back to life. A wave of audible, grateful sighs washed through the room. Brenda shot Maya a smug, "I told you so," glare that made Maya's jaw clench. The relief lasted for 4 minutes. It was preceded by a groan, a deep, metallic sound of protest from the bowels of the hospital. The building shuddered, a single, violent tremor. Then the lights died again, plunging them back into the red-tinged horror. This time, the silence that followed felt permanent. Final. The walkie-talkie crackled again, the voice on the other end strained and thin. The backup generator was dead. The water main in the basement had ruptured from the initial surge, flooding the generator room. There would be no more miracles. The NICU was now an island, running on the finite life of battery packs. 2, maybe 3 hours. Maya glanced at the portable monitor she'd attached to Luna's isolette. The battery indicator, a tiny icon of a battery, was already at 85%. Luna's high-flow ventilator was a vampire, and it was draining her life source second by second. This was no longer a gap to be bridged. It was a cliff edge, and they were all about to go over it. Maya's mind raced, connecting fragments of emergency drills and disaster plans. She overheard Dr. Evans, his voice now tight and strained, on the phone with an administrator. The plan, he was being told, was an eventual evacuation. Critical patients would be taken to the roof for a helicopter airlift to University Hospital across the river. But the helicopters couldn't fly until dawn, at the earliest. The designated emergency staging area was the 12th floor pediatric surgical ward, which had a secure, direct stairwell to the helipad. The NICU was on the 3rd floor. An idea, insane and terrifying, began to form in her mind. It was a violation of every rule she had ever been taught, but it was also the only thing that made sense. She left her post for a moment, asking another nurse to take over bagging Luna. She approached Brenda and Dr. Evans, who were huddled over a tablet, desperately trying to get a signal. "We have to move the most critical babies," Maya said, her voice low but steady. "We need to get them to the 12th floor staging area now, while the batteries still have some charge." Dr. Evans looked up from the tablet, his expression one of utter disbelief, as if a piece of equipment had just spoken to him. He actually scoffed. "Absolutely not, nurse. Do you have any idea the risk involved in moving a vented infant up 9 flights of stairs in the dark? We shelter in place. That's the protocol. It's the only protocol." Brenda, ever his echo, chimed in, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We wait for instructions, Torres. You are a nurse. You follow orders. You are not authorized to transport a patient without a physician and a respiratory therapist present. We stay. That is final." Maya felt a hot surge of frustration. They were clinging to rules written for a crisis that fit neatly into a binder. This wasn't in the binder. "There won't be time," she pleaded, her voice rising. "The batteries are going to die. Luna's monitor is already draining faster than the others. By the time the order comes down, it will be too late. We'll be bagging cold babies." The words hung in the air, ugly and true. Dr. Evans's face hardened, his condescension solidifying into a cold fury. "Your job right now, nurse, is to keep that ambu bag going at a steady, calm rhythm. Do you understand me? Do your job." He turned his back on her, a gesture of absolute dismissal. Brenda gave her one last withering look before turning to organize the rapidly dwindling supply of glow sticks. Maya stood there for a moment, the red light painting her in shadows. They were wrong. Their precious protocol was a death sentence, written in disappearing ink. She looked over at Pod C, at the tiny, almost translucent baby fighting for every breath, and then at the dark, useless elevators at the end of the hall. The decision wasn't made with her head. It was made with the same instinct that drove her hands to the ambu bag. It was a choice born of a terrible, stark clarity. Protocol was going to kill this baby. So, to hell with protocol? The window of opportunity was small. Dr. Evans and Brenda were pulled away by a sudden, frantic code. In another pod, a larger, more stable baby was unexpectedly crashing. In the ensuing commotion, Maya moved with a thief's stealth and a surgeon's precision. She secured a small, green, portable oxygen tanka pony tank to the side of Luna's isolette with practiced knots. She stuffed her pockets with a fresh ambu bag, a portable pulse oximeter, and its finger-sized probe. Her friend Sarah, a fellow nurse with wide, terrified eyes, watched her. "Maya, you can't," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They'll fire you. They'll take your license." "They can't fire me if she's alive," Maya whispered back, not taking her eyes off her task. She gently untaped the sensors from Luna, bundling the wires. She swaddled the baby, a tiny 2-pound bundle of tubes and fragility, in 3 layers of blankets. Then, with an exhale that felt like it carried all the fear in her body, she disconnected Luna from the isolette's monitoring system, scooped her up, and held her against her chest. One arm cradled the baby, the other held the ambu bag, her thumb and forefinger already finding the rhythm. Squeeze, release. Sarah, her face a mask of awe and terror, shoved 2 protein bars and a bottle of water into Maya's scrub pockets. Third stairwell from the end. Stairwell A. It's the one that goes all the way to the roof access. Her eyes were wet. Go. Maya gave a single, grateful nod. She walked, head down, past the chaos of the code, a ghost slipping through her own life. She reached the heavy steel fire door of Stairwell A. The metal was cold and final under her hand. She pushed it open, and the world dissolved into a hollow, echoing darkness. The door swung shut behind her with a deafening clang that sealed her in. It was the sound of no return. She was alone. Just her, a baby, and 12 flights of stairs. Her phone, clenched between her teeth, provided a weak, bouncing beam of light that only illuminated the immediate, grimy concrete step in front of her. The air was thick with the smell of dust and disuse. The only sounds were the echo of her own ragged breathing and the soft, steady whoosh of the bag inflating Luna's lungs. The portable monitor she'd slung over her shoulder like a purse cast a faint green glow, showing Luna's oxygen saturation holding at a stable 94%. For now, by the 5th floor, the burn had started. A deep, acidic fire in her biceps and shoulders from the awkward, constant posture of cradling and bagging. The pony tank, which had seemed so light in the NICU, now felt like an anchor pulling her back down. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. Her scrubs were already damp with sweat. The landing door creaked open, spilling a sliver of red emergency light into the stairwell. A haggard-looking resident doctor squinted at her. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his voice edged with exhaustion. "This stairwell is supposed to be kept clear for emergency personnel." "I'm a nurse," Maya said, breathless, "taking a critical NICU patient to the 12th floor staging area." The resident stared at her as if she'd just announced she was flying there. "There is no staging area yet. We haven't gotten the order to move. You need to go back to your floor. You're violating protocol." He offered no help, no flashlight, no assistance, just the dead weight of the rules. He was another cog in the machine that was grinding to a halt. Maya didn't have the energy to argue. She simply adjusted her grip on Luna and pushed past him. "I'm reporting this to Evans," he called after her as the door wheezed shut, plunging her back into darkness. She reached the 7th floor, geriatrics, and stumbled out into the hallway, desperate for a moment's rest. The floor was a low-lit bedlam. Frightened, elderly patients whimpered in their beds, and 2 overwhelmed nurses ran between them. Maya leaned against a wall, her legs trembling, trying to check Luna's endotracheal tube in the gloom. An old woman named Elsie, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, saw her from her bed. She didn't ask questions. She didn't quote protocol. She simply picked up the small, battery-powered reading lamp from her bedside table and held it out. "Here, dear," she whispered, her voice papery. "Let the little one have some light." The small pool of steady yellow light felt like a benediction. It was a tiny act of grace in a world that had turned hostile. In that small circle of light, Maya resecured the tape on Luna's tube and listened to her chest, reassured by the faint, equal breath sounds. The moment was shattered by a sharp, authoritative voice from the end of the hall. "Ma'am, stay right where you are." 2 figures approached a hospital security guard and a young, uniformed police officer. The cop's face was tense, his eyes darting around as if expecting a threat from every shadow. He was running on adrenaline and orders. "You need to return to your designated floor immediately," he commanded, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Nobody is to be moving between floors. We're on lockdown." Maya straightened up, a fresh wave of adrenaline cutting through her exhaustion. She was done pleading. She was done explaining. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice low and dangerously steady. "This is a critical patient. We are going to the 12th floor." The cop held up a hand, a gesture meant to halt a civilian, not a colleague in crisis. "I don't care if you're the Surgeon General. My orders are to lock down every floor. It's for your own safety." It was the most infuriating, logic-defying statement she had ever heard. Safety was not on the 3rd floor with dying batteries. Safety was 12 floors up. He was another wall, another rule, another man who was going to let this baby die for the sake of an order. Maya shifted Luna in her arms, making sure the tiny, swaddled form was clearly visible in the dim light. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. "This baby's ventilator has no power," she said, locking eyes with the cop. "I am her ventilator. The battery on her monitor is dying. If I stop moving, if I stop breathing for her, she dies. So, you have two choices. You can either shoot me, or you can get out of my way. The young officer's bravado faltered. His gaze dropped from Maya's blazing eyes to the impossibly small baby, and for the first time, he seemed to see not a breach of protocol, but a life hanging in the balance. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the security guard. They stepped aside. Back in the suffocating darkness of Stairwell A, Maya's borrowed fury evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that felt like a physical illness. The 9th-floor landing was her breaking point. Her back was a column of fire. Her hand was a cramped claw, the muscles screaming from the repetitive motion of bagging. She sank down onto the cold concrete, leaning her head back against the wall, her body shaking uncontrollably. What if they were right? The insidious whisper of doubt crept into her mind. What if I'm wrong? What if I drop her? What if her tube slips and I don't notice in the dark? What if I kill her out here in this concrete box all alone? An image flared in her memory, sharp and painful, the memory that lived just beneath the surface of every shift. She was 14, standing beside an incubator, smaller than the ones she worked with now. Inside was her baby brother, Michael, born 3 months too soon. She remembered the maze of tubes, the terrifying stillness of his tiny chest. He had lived for 3 days. 3 days of her parents weeping and doctors speaking in hushed, somber tones about protocols and viability. He was the ghost that propelled her through nursing school, the silent promise she renewed every time she clocked in. She wasn't just saving Luna, she was trying, desperately, to save him. The 9th-floor door burst open with such violence it slammed against the concrete wall. Framed in the red emergency light of the hallway stood Mark Harrison, the hospital's risk management administrator, and right behind him, a seething Dr. Evans. Harrison was a man whose soul had been replaced by a liability clause. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was puce, and his eyes were blazing not with concern, but with pure, unadulterated rage. "Nurse Torres!" His voice was a cannon blast in the enclosed space, making Maya flinch. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" "I just got off a call with the hospital's legal counsel. You have violated a dozen health and safety protocols. You have initiated an unauthorized patient transport against a direct order from an attending physician, creating an unprecedented liability event." Dr. Evans stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. "I told you to stand down, Maya," he hissed, the use of her first name a deliberate, condescending jab. "When that baby codes in this stairwell, her death will be on your hands. We will make sure of it, personally, professionally, and legally." It was surreal. They weren't offering help. They weren't asking about the baby's condition. They were standing over her, threatening her with ruin while she was single-handedly keeping a child alive. The sheer, breathtaking injustice of it burned away her doubt, her fear, her exhaustion. All that was left was a diamond-hard core of righteous anger. She looked up at them from the floor, her eyes dark and hollow but steady. "Her monitor battery had 30 minutes of life left when I left the NICU 2 hours ago," she said, her voice raspy but clear. "She would already be dead if I had listened to you. Your protocol was a death sentence. Your liability was a dead baby. Now get out of my way." With a groan of effort that came from the depths of her soul, she pushed herself back to her feet. She hitched the monitor higher on her shoulder and adjusted her grip on Luna. She walked right at them. For a second, she thought Harrison might physically block her, but something in her ISA, terrifying, primal focus made both men instinctively step back. "This is not over," Harrison sputtered at her back. "You are finished at this hospital." The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his threats and plunging her once more into her solitary world of darkness and resolve. The confrontation had stolen her last reserves of energy, but it had given her something else. Certainty. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a guardian. Then, on the 11th floor landing, the shriek of an alarm tore through the quiet, a high-pitched, insistent beep from the portable pulse oximeter. She fumbled with her phone, the light dancing wildly. The screen glowed with a terrifying number. O2 saturation 82%, and falling. Desatting. No, Maya whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Come on, Luna, stay with me, stay with me." The ET tube must have slipped. In the pitch black, on a filthy landing, she had to perform the most delicate of procedures. She laid Luna carefully on her own jacket, which she'd taken off and folded into a makeshift bed. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely work. Clenching the phone between her teeth, she aimed the beam of light at Luna's face. She checked the tube's depth marking, listened to the baby's chest with the stethoscope she'd shoved in her pocket, and heard the diminished breath sounds on the left side. The tube had migrated. With the gentle, precise touch of a bomb disposal expert, she loosened the tape, pulled the tube back a mere 2 millimeters, and resecured it. She increased her bagging rate, forcing breaths into Luna's struggling lungs, her eyes glued to the monitor. The numbers crawled. 80, 83, 88, 90. The alarm stopped. 92, 94. Stable. She had done it. She had saved her right here on this cold, dirty floor. Maya leaned her forehead against the cool concrete wall, and for the first time she let the tears come. Hot tears of relief, exhaustion, and a terrifying, lonely triumph. Through a small, grime-caked window at the top of the next flight, she could see it. A faint, pearlescent gray filtering through the blackness. Dawn was coming. She picked up her precious cargo and began the final climb. The door to the 12th floor was the heaviest of them all. Maya threw her entire body weight against it, stumbling out into the pediatric surgical ward. The floor was a scene of controlled chaos. Staff from other critical units had congregated there, a handful of patients on portable life support systems lining the halls. The power was still out, but the massive east-facing windows were beginning to drink in the first pale light of a new day, illuminating the floating dust motes and the exhausted faces of her colleagues. Her relief was short-lived. Harrison and Dr. Evans were there, waiting for her like a tribunal. Their faces were grim, their posture rigid with indignation. Before she could even find a safe place to put Luna down, Harrison was on her, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Give me the patient, nurse. Your reckless stunt is over. Security will escort you to an office where you will wait for a formal hearing on your actions." Dr. Evans stepped forward, his hands reaching for the baby. "I'll take her." Maya flinched back, clutching Luna protectively. "She's stable," she rasped, her throat raw. "I need to give a proper report to the transport team." She had climbed a mountain in the dark, fought off dragons of bureaucracy, and saved a life, and her reward was to be treated like a criminal. A bitter, lonely defeat settled in her stomach. And then, a new sound cut through the tension. The heavy, rhythmic clomp of steel-toed boots on linoleum, the jangle of carabiners and heavy gear. A team of 6 firefighters, their faces streaked with soot and sweat, their yellow turnout gear stained with the grime of a city on fire, emerged from the very stairwell she had just conquered. They moved with the weary, deliberate weight of men who had been battling the city's demons all night. Their leader, a captain with salt and pepper hair and decades of emergencies carved into the lines around his eyes, took in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. He saw the furious administrators in their clean clothes. He saw the other doctors and nurses keeping their distance. And he saw, in the center of it all, one small, soot-stained nurse, looking like she was about to collapse, clutching a tiny bundle to her chest. He didn't need a report. He understood. Captain Davies ignored Harrison and Evans as if they were pieces of furniture. He walked directly to Maya, his tired eyes holding a deep and immediate respect. "Is that the patient?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble, but gentle. Maya could only nod, a fresh wave of tears choking her words. "Her name is Luna," she managed to whisper. "She needs transport." Davies looked down at the tiny, blanketed form, then back at Maya's exhausted, tear-streaked, defiant face. A flicker of profound, weary understanding passed through his eyes. This is what it looked like. Not in the movies, not on the news. This was the real thing. He turned to his men. "Okay," he said, his voice now carrying the easy authority of command. "Let's get them through. Clear a path to the helipad access." What happened next was not an order. It was a spontaneous, unspoken consensus. As Maya took her first shaky step toward the stairwell at the end of the hall, one of the firefighters, a huge man who had been leaning against a wall, straightened up. He stood at attention. Then another did, and another. In the space of 10 seconds, the entire crew of exhausted, battle-weary firefighters had formed 2 parallel lines, creating a clear path for her. They stood straight and tall, their helmets now off, and held at their sides in a gesture of profound, silent respect. This was her parade. This was her medal. Maya walked through the silent tunnel of honor. The only sounds in the cavernous hallway were the soft, rhythmic puff of the ambu bag in her hand and the scuff of her worn-out sneakers on the floor. The first direct rays of the rising sun finally broke over the horizon, streaming through the large windows, bathing the scene in a warm, golden light. The firefighters were cast in silhouette, a guard of anonymous, everyday saints. The camera of her memory panned to Harrison and Dr. Evans. They were standing off to the side, forgotten, irrelevant. The bureaucratic power that had seemed so absolute in the suffocating darkness of the stairwell was now revealed for what it was, petty and meaningless in the face of true, unscripted heroism. They watched, their mouths slightly agape, as the woman they had threatened and tried to ruin was being honored by the very heroes of the city. Maya reached the waiting flight nurses at the end of the hall. With a final surge of professional duty, she gave a perfect, concise medical report, her voice clear despite her exhaustion. She carefully, gently, transferred Luna into the transport isolette. The moment the baby was no longer in her arms, the adrenaline that had held her together for 5 straight hours vanished. Her legs buckled, the world tilted and went gray. She was falling, but she never hit the floor. Captain Davies was there, catching her in his strong arms before she went down. Hours later, she was sitting on a cot in the hospital cafeteria, which had been converted into a temporary triage and staff rest area. She was wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, sipping the sweetest, hottest coffee she had ever tasted. The story, of course, had already taken on a life of its own, spreading through the hospital's whispered network. POPLA nurses, doctors, orderlies looked at her differently now, with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Captain Davies found her. "My report's going to have a special commendation in it for you, Nurse Torres," he said, handing her a bottle of water. "I made it clear to your administration that any other course of action would have resulted in a dead child. You did good." He paused. "And I told that suit Harrison a thing or two about priorities." As if on cue, Harrison appeared. The rage was gone, replaced by a slick political sheen. A local news crew had somehow gotten wind of the story "Hero Nurse Saves Baby in Blackout" and was already camped out front. "Maya," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "the board and I are in full agreement. Your brave and decisive actions in the face of this crisis were exemplary. The hospital is fully supportive of you. We're already discussing a special award for meritorious service." The hypocrisy was so thick, Maya felt she could choke on it. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, and gave a small, tired nod. She didn't need his plastic award or his PR spin. She had the silent salute from the men in soot-stained coats. That was enough. Weeks later, Maya stood in the bright, cheerful NICU at University Hospital. She was in street clothes, a visitor. In an open-air crib in front of her, no longer imprisoned in a plastic box, was Luna. She was bigger, pinker, and breathing all on her own. Luna's parents, a young couple who looked like they hadn't stopped crying with gratitude for a month, enveloped Maya in a fierce hug. "You're her angel," the mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "Her guardian angel. You're part of our family forever." Maya just smiled, her own eyes wet. She reached into the crib and offered the baby her index finger. Luna's tiny, perfect hand, which once seemed too fragile to even exist, wrapped around it with surprising strength. She looked up, past the grateful parents, out the large window at the New York City skyline, fully lit, vibrant, and bustling with life. The long, dark night was over. The dawn had been worth the fight.